Let's take a look at some pointers in regard to collaborating with others. By the end of the chapter, you'll be able to explain why the ability to work well as part of a group is an essential skill, and describe how groups evolve into well-functioning teams, discuss ways of communicating openly with other group members, which we know is super important if you've ever been involved in group work. Identify the various types of diversity and discuss how to build the kind of cultural competence that facilitates working with people who are different from you. Describe approaches that can be used to resolve conflicts. So looking at all of this, we want to start by preparing when we're working in a group. And when it talks about preparing, the main goal here is to choose your group members thoughtfully. Sometimes you have a choice with your group members, sometimes you do not have a choice with your group members. And I think majority of us gravitate toward our friends for our group members. However, when it comes to an academic situation, it's important to think about the other considerations that might go into choosing the best group member for you. So it's important that when you do choose group members, that all members have a similar end goal and compatible schedules. Ensure there's a mix of all skills required, and that you respect one another and that you can be sensitive to each other's needs. So going back to that, if we just pick our friends every time, and our friends may not be on the same level of us as us academically, or may not have the same goal in mind, then that can pose challenges with group work. And as we discussed in class, you guys have all been involved, seemingly all been involved in a group that simply doesn't work. Then you're going to organize. So select a topic for the group project creatively. You're going to brainstorm and allow everyone to contribute. So a good way to brainstorm, especially from afar, so digitally, if you guys are working on a group project now, would be using Google Docs and creating a Google Doc where you guys can all contribute. And if you each have your own writing color when you're using a Google Doc, so if the text is one color for one group member and a different color for another group member, then you can really quickly and easily see who contributed which pieces. And then you're going to determine how the group work will function. So you have to recognize the stages in a group evolution. The forming stage. So we'll go through the different stages, but the forming stage is when members grade expectations and time commitments. Things such as when, where, and how often the group will meet have to be considered, how the workload will be divided among members, and who is responsible for what. This is the most important stage in getting going with group work. So in this stage, it's recommended, now we all know that not many people do this, but it's recommended that you create like a team charter. And a team charter is kind of like what we created at the start of class, where it talks about the general rules within our classroom. It's recommended that you do the same about the general rules within your group. And it can be really helpful to bring people back to focus. So this is a sample team charter. Group members will attend all group meetings. Group meetings will be held every Friday from 12:30 to 2:30. We will start and end group meetings on time, and all meetings will have an agenda. Each member of the group is responsible for getting their work done by the agreed upon time. And group members will use the team's Office Live site as the repository for all of their work. So what this is identified, it's a set of expectations for the group. So you know that when you're scheduled to meet, you know what you need to bring to the table ahead of time. You know what time you're going to meet. You know what the meeting will look like. And you know how you're going to collaborate your information. So it can be really, really, really handy. And of course, if a group member is not meeting their goals or they're not sort of doing their part, then you have a group discussion where you bring back this team charter and ask what's up. So then we have to think about evaluation and rethinking for looking at our power structure. So when we're evaluating, we need to react positively when things don't go as planned. So we've got the storming stage, the norming stage, and the performing stage. And these are sort of the 3 stages typically involved in group work. So with that, sometimes in group work, things don't go as well as you had hoped. And sadly, especially when that's friendships that are involved in group work together, it can be really, really challenging. And you might sort of let things go in order to save the friendship as part of group work. But if you're able to handle situations in a positive, mature, and respectful way, you should be able to get to the answer that you need to get at. So if a group member is not pulling their weight, having an open and honest conversation about what's going on and why they're not pulling their weight might be a help. And then rethink, so a postmortem or an after meeting and the adjourning stage, just to go through and figure out what worked really well and what worked very poorly. I don't know if you guys can hear that. My dog is scratching nonstop in the background. It's really gross. All right, being a good listener. So in a group situation, we all have to be good listeners. And step 1 to being a good listener, stop talking. Just stop talking. Demonstrate that you're actually listening. So if somebody's trying to express their point, if they're trying to go through the material that they've worked so hard to create, you need to take some time to listen to that. Demonstrate that you're listening. Use reflective feedback. So reflective feedback is perhaps rephrasing what they just said to ensure that you're understanding it. It might be posing open-ended questions based on the material that they're presenting to you. Ask questions about the material and deal with distractions. So I've got this dog who is scratching in the background, and every so often I pause my video and I tell her to stop. But dealing with distractions is so, so important in a group situation. You can imagine working with your friends and suddenly you get your phones out and you're completely off track in 5 minutes. So we also have to consider that, of course, the world we live in continues to get more and more diverse every day that we evolve. And diversity encompasses all sorts of things. So it encompasses racial, gender, sexual orientation, age, mental and physical characteristics. All of that is considered to be within diversity. And additional diversity traits include religion, education, income level, and individual differences. And not just income level, I would argue to say that whole social economic status. So what that does in general, it creates a group of individuals that have completely different lived experiences from each other, which can be really, really, really beneficial when it comes to creating interesting material. However, of course, it does pose challenges. So looking at diversity, this is our diversity wheel, just to look at all the different things that contribute to diversity. And things that would definitely affect your group work would be things like work style, work experience, organizational role and level, communication style. All of this will affect your group work. So looking at ethnicity and culture, ethnicity is shared origins or cultural patterns, and culture is the learned behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes that are characteristic of an individual, society, or population, and the products that they create. And both of these can impact group work significantly. So different generations view work differently. So differences among the generations, if we have a quick look, we have veterans, which are born 1922 to 1945. We have baby boomers, which are 1946 to 64. Generation X, which is 1965 to 1980. And then Generation Y, which is 1981 to 2000. And if you have a look at it and go down the list on the left-hand side, you can see how completely different these individuals from different eras react to work. And why is this important? This is extremely important because people are going to value work differently, in part based on their generation. So if we look at, even if we look at The topic work is. The veterans say it's an obligation. Baby boomers say it's an exciting adventure. Generation X says it's a difficult challenge or it's a contract. And Generation Y says a means to an end and fulfillment. If you carry on down, communications, which is really important in group work, veterans say a formal communication is best or a memo is best. Baby boomers like in-person communication. Generation X likes direct and immediate communication. And Generation Y prefer email, voicemail, and of course now more so we're looking at things like texting and using apps. So we have to keep all of this in mind because the way you communicate with each other, the way you expect things from each other will definitely be influenced by the year that you were born and the generation that you're from within. So building cultural competence within a group is extremely important, and cultural competence is learned. So it's a knowledge of other people's backgrounds, their customs, their perspectives, and their history. And remember that this could be to do with race, this could be to do with social economic status, this could be to do with their generation. So all of that creates a culture. It provides a basis for civic and engagement. It permits us to act with civility towards each other, so act nicely toward each other, and it allows us to make the most of our contribution to society, and on a smaller scale, allows us to make the most to our contributions in a group project. When or before even you're working within a group, it's important to explore your own prejudices and stereotypes. So prejudice are the evaluations or judgments of members of a group based on their being members of that group. So you know that, 3 members in your group are baby boomers. Maybe they're a little bit older than you, and you have an idea that they're going to act exactly like your parents. And you know that they're not going to be able to use internet, they're not going to like technology, they're going to want to do things one way, etc. So it's the evaluations or judgments automatically just based on them being part of that group. That's a prejudice. Discrimination is the behavior toward members of that group based on their being members of that group. So then let's use baby boomers as an example. You've got these 3 people in your group who are baby boomers, and all of a sudden you don't even give them assignments that are digitally based. You're just assuming based on your own prejudice that they're not going to be able to do it, or maybe you don't email them as much as you email the rest of the group. So these are behaviors that are now acting differently toward them because of your prejudice. And then stereotypes are beliefs and expectations about members of a group that are held simply because they're members of that group. So here, rather than having the understanding of what your parents are like, and that formed the baby boomer impression in your mind, this is now simply the way you're feeling about this group because they're members of this group. To you, maybe you don't like them because of their age, you don't like them that they're in college with you, whatever it may be. But these are stereotypes. So before you go into a group situation, you need to explore your own prejudices and stereotypes. If there's somebody in your group that you don't know very well, and you feel uncomfortable with them or you have a predetermined judgment of them, you need to check that. You need to look at that and see why that is. So going back to developing cultural competence, it's important to study other cultures and customs, so to get out of your own box and to challenge the way you feel about certain cultures. And I'm not just talking about like religious or geographical based cultures. I'm talking about cultures of generations, social economic status. So you need to be more aware of your own culture. It's important to travel if you can travel, especially when you're done school. It'd be ideal to participate in community service, things that get you out of your usual group of friends, out of your usual group of family. Don't ignore people's backgrounds. Don't make assumptions about who people are, and accept differences. So all of this will help you work in a group situation a lot better. It helps you be a little bit more understanding about why people act a certain way, and it helps you be more empathetic toward other people. We go back to that word empathetic. And this is not just about group work, this is also about teamwork in the vet field as well. So check your progress, ask yourself the following questions. How do I make judgments about people? Who are my friends? Do I openly express positive values about diversity? Am I learning about other cultures? Am I even-handed in my relationships? So do I treat people similarly? Do I recognize that all people have the same basic needs? Do I look down upon other racial or ethnic groups because I take pride in my own? And do I look at things with different perspectives? These, although we're talking about group work, these are honestly questions to ask yourself going forward in the field. As you start getting into a work situation, whether that be your own work, so if you create a grooming salon or create your own dog boarding facility, or you work in a vet clinic, or you teach one day, whatever it may be, wherever your career path takes you, you will be working with people who do not have the same shared experiences as you. And the sooner you can sort of check your own prejudices and identify how you feel about certain groups of people and why, and sort of challenge that, the better off you'll be long term. Also important, understanding how you affect other people. So being self-aware of how your personality affects other people, but also aware of how your own racial, ethnic, and cultural background affects others. Regardless of background, other students at your school share similar concerns about success and life goals, so you all have that shared experience. And bridging your differences can create lasting social ties. Managing and resolving conflicts. So if you're working within a group and you've got conflicts that are starting to stir up, couple pointers with that. We've all been in conflicts. We've all had arguments. We've had arguments that go really well, and we've had arguments that go really, really poorly. So a few pointers. If you're in the middle of a conflict, when you're talking to the other people, use I statements to diffuse anger. So you would say, I am concerned with the level of contribution that each of the members is putting in. I am hurt and upset by the way group members are treating each other. So instead of saying you need to put in more work and you need to stop treating everybody really crappy, we're taking it back and reflecting on it as ourselves. Create a win-win proposition. So looking at what's going on, what the conflict is, seeing if you can find a solution to meet in the middle. And some more tips, stop, look, and listen. So again, if you're in the middle of a conflict, just stop what you're doing. Stop talking, stop arguing, just stop, look at the other person, and start listening to what they're having to say. Diffuse the argument as much as you can, so bringing it down rather than ramping it up. Admit personal responsibility when that's appropriate. And when you have some responsibility in what's going on, and listen to the real message. Okay, listen to what that person is actually trying to say to you. These things are extremely important when we're trying to work through conflict, especially in a group project situation. Summary. Why is learning to work well as part of a team an essential life skill? Well, we know that this reflects later down the line as part of your career. How can I communicate openly with other group members? We talked about some strategies, and listening is probably your best bet to start off. How can I become more at ease with differences and diversity? We talked about things like being engaged in community work, getting to know people, listening to them. And lastly, I offered some tips on conflict resolution. So these components here are all testable materials, hint, hint. And if you have any questions about the class material, please let me know.